Hello, this is Ruslan Belov with you. Trump has resumed arms supplies. Reports are already coming in that both shells and HIMARS rockets have begun arriving. In general, everything is going back to the way it was under Biden. This means the war will be long, the fighting continues, and we will continue analyzing the situation at the front. Let's move to the map. Before we begin the frontline overview, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us promote the video on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. So friends, today we'll start reviewing the frontline situation, not from north to south as we usually do, but the other way around, from south to north. The reason is that the Zaporizhzhia direction is slowly coming back to life. Just for perspective, in the first 9 days of July, we took control of as much territory in the Zaporizhzhia region as we did in the entire month of June. Importantly, we managed to cross to the right bank, something we hadn't been able to do here for 3 years. Since the Russian army arrived here in 2022, it had been essentially stuck in place. But now a huge breakthrough has taken place, not huge in depth, but huge in terms of its significance. That part of Kamyanske, which lies on the right bank, is still being stormed by Russian forces. I saw some reports claiming the village had already come fully under Russian control. That's not accurate. Fighting is still ongoing. At the same time, we've already reached the next village, Plavny. It's located along the reservoir, so right now it's being heavily targeted by aviation to pave the way for infantry to enter, move into the positions held by the Ukrainian armed forces, which by then will have been weakened by the airstrikes, and clear out the remaining garrison. An offensive has also resumed east of Kamyanske in the area of Stepov. Yesterday, we managed to improve our positions there by 900 meters. That may not sound like much, especially compared to the kind of figures we sometimes see from the Donetsk region. There, for instance, I recently showed you how we advanced 9 kilometers, but Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia are entirely different sectors. In Zaporizhzhia, Russian forces captured 7 square kilometers in June. In Donetsk, over 400. That's the kind of difference we're talking about. Now let's move on to the south of Donetsk Oblast, where the Vostok group is operating. They've taken another village and are already storming a new one. Although, I should say a few words about the Ukrainian attempts to counterattack. They are trying. But after that, we'll move on to our own advances in the southern Donetsk direction. The Ukrainian forces haven't made any significant gains in the past 24 hours. Only in one area did they manage to slightly breach our defenses and push us back a little. This happened in the Konstantinivka sector, specifically in one of the last remaining strongholds of the Ukrainian armed forces in that area, the village of Yablonivka. You might remember, in a previous episode I explained that Ukraine had 2 major strongholds left that were preventing the Russian army from breaking through to Konstantinivka from the south. These are Yablonivka and Oleksandro Kalinove. In the latter, Oleksandro Kalinov, the Russian army has nearly finished off the Ukrainian forces. As you can see on the map, most of the village is under Russian control, and only the northern part remains under Ukrainian control. But with Yablonivka, things are much more difficult, and for a good reason. First, the village is significantly larger, and it stretches along the river. Just so you understand, from its western to eastern edge, it's about 7.5 kilometers. The Russian army managed to enter the western edge and advance 2.5 kilometers into the village, meaning almost 1/3 of it had come under Russian control. I say had because it's no longer the case. Over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to push us back here. You can see this black line. It marks the line of contact as of yesterday. Now it runs here, about 400 meters back. The total area that came under Ukrainian control is around 0.2 square kilometers. A small patch, of course, but still unpleasant. First, this is a residential area, and even 100 meters can be incredibly difficult to take, especially in a fortified place like Yablonivka, which serves as a defensive stronghold. Second, of course, we always want to move forward and never retreat, right? But this is the front. Things like this happen. It's not always possible to repel every Ukrainian attack. Overall, if we talk about the Konstantinivka direction, it's clearly bogged down. If you remember May, when we were advancing rapidly here, 2, 3, even 4 kilometers a day, Now everything is much slower, and we even have to fend off Ukrainian assaults from time to time. Fortunately, there are still areas where progress continues. One of those is the southern Donetsk direction, the area of responsibility of the Vostok Group. Here, we see progress every day. A few days ago, the village of Podobne came under our control. The guys didn't stop there, they pushed further. They entered the village of Tolstoy and, over the past 24 hours, completely drove out the Ukrainian forces from there. And if you've been following the reports regularly, then you know, when the guys from the Vostok Group announce that a village has been taken, it's not just words, not just reports sent up the chain. Sometimes in other areas, no need to point fingers, it's just talk. But with Vostok, it's always backed up by visual confirmation. This time was no exception. The guys immediately released footage with flags from different parts of the village, plus drone video flying over the area. So there's no doubt the village is under full and uncontested Russian control. Even American cartographers, who usually try to side with the Ukrainian forces, were forced to mark the area red, as it should be, because there is simply no doubt. The advance through residential areas amounted to an impressive 1.7 kilometers, with the total area secured being 1.5 square kilometers. And as I said, the guys didn't stop there. They're continuing the assault, moving southward toward the village of Mian. This hasn't yet been fully reflected on the map, but I've already received several reports confirming that Russian troops have entered the village. Currently, it's marked as a grey zone, with about half of the village under Russian control. We expect that in a day or two, the Russian army will secure full control. Additionally, there was another area where the Vostok Group advanced in the past 24 hours, even farther south. Take a look. They managed to improve their positions and push westward from Volny Pole toward Novohrihorivka. The advance amounted to 1.5 kilometers, and the area brought under control exceeded 3 square kilometers. The goal here is to clear out the entire territory surrounding the village of Kamishuvaka. Sumy direction. Over the past 2 months, Russian forces have penetrated Ukrainian defenses to a depth of up to 15 kilometers, spanning 30 kilometers along the front line. This hasn't gone unnoticed by the Ukrainian command, which is now attempting to stabilize the situation along the Kondrativka-Andriivka-Alexeyevka line. At present, extremely heavy fighting continues in the Alexeyevka and Kondrativka areas. Kyiv is deploying a significant amount of manpower, trying to wedge itself into Russian positions between villages in order to isolate them. According to available information, the Ukrainian command has redeployed units previously involved in fighting near Tetkino. These forces are now being targeted by Russia's operational tactical aviation. In eastern Yunakivka, clashes are ongoing near the highway at the center of the village. Securing this line would allow Russian forces to take control of the surrounding high ground, which would expose Ukrainian positions in Sumy to Russian tube artillery fire. This would also open the road toward Pisarivka, which contains a key logistical crossing for Kyiv. Losing control of it would lead to a serious crisis in Ukraine's defense north of Sumy. A new tactic of strikes demonstrates Russia's priority of guaranteed target elimination at any cost. If it takes 10 to 15 drones to destroy a critical infrastructure hub, industrial facility, or military warehouse, such a cost is considered justified. This shows Russia's readiness to use kamikaze drones on a large scale to achieve its military goals. This also indirectly points to a significant level of domestic drone production, which allows for sustained high-volume strikes. For Ukraine, this means constant pressure and unavoidable losses among defended sites. The use of drone swarms allows Russia to wipe out dozens of major targets per day, including depots, command centers, and mobilization reception points. Dmitry Peskov stated that the Kremlin remains calm in response to Trump's tough rhetoric. We will continue trying to repair the seriously damaged relations between Russia and the United States. According to Peskov, the US has never actually stopped supplying weapons to Kyiv. He also reminded that Russia is now waiting for proposals from Kyiv regarding a third round of negotiations. And with each passing day, Ukraine will have to accept more and more of the new realities. According to CNN sources, Trump only asked Haxton to assess US weapons stockpiles, not to halt arms deliveries to Ukraine. Trump said Ukraine is asking the US for a Patriot missile battery, but it's expensive and rare, so he will review the request. If the US sends just 10 Patriot interceptors to Ukraine, it would be a ridiculous joke, a Ukrainian Air Force officer told The Times. According to him, that quantity wouldn't be enough for even a single battle. Earlier, it was reported that Trump had promised Zelensky to immediately send 10 missiles. As of December 2024, Ukraine had received a total of 847 such missiles from the US. Moscow is clearly preparing for a prolonged war and is not abandoning its goals despite setbacks in US-Russia relations, Wall Street Journal notes. According to sources, Putin knows that Trump tends to shift his positions. Today he may praise Ukraine's resolve and promise more aid, but tomorrow he could return to supporting Putin's stance. Since Russia hasn't changed its position since the start of the war, there's no reason for it to change it now, the article suggests. Today, a conference on Ukraine's reconstruction begins in Rome. Over 3,500 delegates are attending, including 100 official delegations, 40 international organizations, and 2,000 companies, about 500 of which are Italian. Ukraine plans to sign a number of agreements, but investment projects remain uncertain. The largest potential investor, BlackRock, has refused to participate, writes Oleg Tsaryov. As I mentioned before, heads of state and governments will attend. Trump's representative Keith Kellogg has arrived, and Zelensky is meeting with him in Rome. Earlier, he met with the Pope, who once again expressed his readiness to host peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine at the Vatican. German Chancellor Merz informed Parliament that diplomatic efforts to end the war in Ukraine have been exhausted. France's defense minister, Sébastien Lecornu, declared that Russia's demands to demilitarize Ukraine cross a red line for the EU. Estonia will block the 18th EU sanctions package if the proposed oil price cap is raised from $45 to $60 per barrel, said Estonia's foreign minister. In other words, Estonia demands stricter sanctions. Meanwhile, Slovakia, at the ambassadorial level, blocked the 18th sanctions package because of proposals to ban purchases of Russian oil and gas. Slovakia is seeking more favorable terms for itself. Different approaches, same result. No compromise has been reached yet, although the EU hopes to resolve it in the coming days. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán declared that Ukraine and the EU have lost the conflict with Russia, which cannot be defeated. He noted that most EU leaders still support continued warfare in Ukraine, but only Hungary and Slovakia are calling for peace. Hungary also opposed the EU budget plan for 2028 to 2034, which includes €100 billion in support for Ukraine in the war with Russia. The Russian publication MIK writes that this is an interesting view of events, and one that is, generally speaking, accurate. What's next with Trump and Ukraine? Noam Chomsky, one of the most compelling intellectuals of our time, has an interesting theory. The Wall Street Journal and Financial Times are elite publications, made by elites for elites. The content they publish reflects the thinking of those same elites, so their materials are worth paying attention to, even if they sometimes spread misinformation. The Washington Post and New York Times, on the other hand, were made by elites for the masses, according to Chomsky. He believes their main purpose is to manipulate the public. If that's the case, then the Wall Street Journal article stating that Trump is tired of playing games with Putin and is preparing some trouble for Russia over Ukraine should be interpreted as the end of the honeymoon, or rather, the first half year of the second Trump administration's Russia-US relations. This is partly confirmed by chatter in Trump circles over the past 2 months that Ukraine definitely needs a new Patriot battery. It doesn't matter how or through whom, it must be delivered. Because Trump can't allow Ukraine to become his own Afghanistan. Even if he keeps shouting that this is Biden's war, he cannot allow Kyiv to lose. A Ukrainian defeat would be pinned on him. That's why he, just like America's European allies, will continue to support Ukraine as long as it can hurt Russia and deny Moscow its objectives. If NATO membership for Ukraine is not guaranteed, and the current administration's stance is that it's not needed right now, then its defense capabilities must be supported by other means. That's why the US won't supply offensive weapons. Instead, the Europeans, playing the bad cops, will do that, so that the good cop Trump can still present himself as a neutral mediator. But when it comes to defensive systems and anything that can be passed off as such, the Americans will provide those. New sanctions will also likely be adopted soon, pushed by hawkish neocon congressmen. The administration will again hide behind others. But Trump and his team will say, "We warned Putin not to play games with the negotiation process."